Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Thank you, guys. Thank you. So Pastor Luke and Tommy and to the Dream City staff and to everyone here, I want to thank you guys for this act of boldness for doing this tonight. And so it is so necessary. And before I go any further, this is not the most important thing I'm doing this week. On Saturday, Eric and I are getting married, which is very exciting. So no matter how good it goes tonight, there will be something more important that happens this week. But Luke, let it be known that two great things are started in this week in 2021 in May in Phoenix, Arizona. I also want to thank some other people here tonight. I want to thank my pastor, Rob McCoy, who came in from Thousand Oaks, California, who has just been amazing to me in so many different ways. I first met Rob, it was about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and he was mayor of Thousand Oaks, California during the Baseline shooting. You might remember where I remember 9 people lost their lives to a shooter. And he was a pastor who ran for local government. And the city needed a pastor at that time as mayor. And when I met him, I said, wait a second, you mean that as a pastor, you're able to run for local office? And we got to talking, and I realized, growing up in a Bible-believing church, how Christians have not leaned into their proper role in the public square in our country. And I've spoken at over 70 churches in the last year. 70. I spoke from Seattle, which I just came from, and that was an interesting event, to Steve Smotherman's church in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You got a great church, by the way. And I realized that if the church does not rise up at this moment, if the church does not take its proper role, then the country and the republic will be gone as we know it. And so, as I spoke at so many of these different churches, I realized that when I was speaking to the body of Christ, they weren't just listening to what I was saying. In this wonderful church, we had a great time a couple weeks ago. They were waiting for me to tell them what to do. You know, Christians in America, we're action-oriented. Whether it be parking cars or doing amazing things in Colorado City, it's not in our DNA to sit idly by when something bad is happening. It's not, we don't need convincing. Once we see a problem, we want to be part of the solution. And so I pitched this idea to the Barnetts, and Rob and I were talking about it, and Steve and I have been talking about it. What if the churches of this country and pastors started to take a more public stance? So I really was inspired by a couple verses. And it's an answer to a question that some people have, which is, why should Christians care about government? Why should Christians care about the public square? We kind of hear that every so often, right? Let that happen itself, and we're just going to kind of worry about the church. They always say separation of church and state, which is not in the U.S. Constitution. But I think it's a single letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention. But I think if this last year taught us anything, it's time to try to keep the state out of the church. After they told the church that it's not essential, after they came into our ability to worship. In Jeremiah 29:7, it says, "Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if the city prospers, you will also prosper." We are commanded to care about the city of which we are in. So I'm going to start really broad here tonight. I'm going to talk about why Christians need to care about what's happening around you. And then I'm going to get really specific. By really specific, I'm going to read you curriculum that your children are learning from here in Arizona. I'm going to get even more specific. I'm going to tell you the school board that approved it. I'm going to get even more specific. I'm going to tell you when that school board is meeting in the next couple weeks if you find this curriculum to be somewhat disagreeable. And it's always important to remember, everything we do as Christians needs to be full of grace, gentle, kind, but also 100% truth. And if we see something in our local community, we should do something about that. So why should we care about the world around us? Well, in Proverbs 29:2, it says, "When the righteous increase, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan." You've been probably doing a lot of groaning recently, right? You've been doing a lot of, man, I wish they weren't doing that. That doesn't reflect my values. You know, I came from Illinois, and it's a good place to be from, by the way. In Illinois, we have term limits. It's 1 term in office, 1 term in jail. A little different than most states. And I came here to Arizona seeking freedom. And now I'm looking around seeing the same sort of decisions being made. And by the way, I'm not even talking politically. I'm talking of the moral, cultural issues of the day that then result into political decisions. Because in Illinois, I saw a church that decided they were not going to get in the public square. In Illinois, it has one of the largest churches in America. You guys all know it. But they decided always they were not going to get involved in any sort of moral or cultural issues. And I think that was a mistake. So this is actually an inflection point here in Arizona. So as we're broadcasting this to the entire nation, I also want to make sure I talk to the people in this room, because if we don't care about the local issues, the issues where we can look people eye to eye on, and we just always act as if the most important thing is Washington, D.C., we're fooling ourselves. Because it's actually easier to hope that everything's going to be solved on Air Force One. But the tougher fights are the ones that happen really locally. So how about 3 examples of how Christians have influenced our world that we're living in right now for good? So this is the basic reason why we should care about government, is that we should always try to impact everything for God's purpose. Music, arts, entertainment, business, finance, and yes, even government and civic life. Well, how about the founding of our country? The founding of this beautiful country. Is it just like any other country? Well, John Jay, the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States, says, quote, "Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers." John Jay, first Supreme Court Justice of the United States. How about a signer of the Declaration of Independence? One of the most amazing quotes, which is right here, Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration from Pennsylvania, who was speaking out against slavery, saying domestic slavery is repugnant to the principles of Christianity. It is a rebelling against the authority of a common father. It is a practical denial of the extent and efficacy of the death of a common savior. It is an usurpation of the prerogative of the great sovereign of the universe, who has solemnly claimed an exclusive property in the souls of men. You see, this country was founded by people that were prayerful, spirit-filled, Bible-believing Christians that took an act of faith. You see, why do we call the founders pilgrims? They weren't going to Israel. Usually you call people pilgrims when they're going to the Holy Land. They were going to a barren and desolate land. And they signed a document called the Mayflower Compact. It's only about 2 paragraphs long. They actually signed it while they were still at sea. And they signed it as a promise amongst each other. It's one of the most important documents ever written. It was one of the first documents where they said, hey, when we hit the shores, there's gonna be nothing waiting there. We don't know if we're gonna get killed or die. We know this, we're gonna have to figure out how to govern ourselves. And the most important thing when we try to govern ourselves is not King George, but it's gonna be God. That's basically what that document said. And if you don't like it, go try to figure it out yourselves. That's a massive step forward. The founding of this country are the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence. The great majority, and some historians believe all, identified themselves as Christians. And all but 1 were Protestants. 4 were either present or former ministers, and a number of the signers were sons of the clergy. At least half of them studied divinity at various universities, and the denominations were between Episcopalian, Anglican, and mainstream Protestantism. John Adams, the second American president, said, quote, "I have examined all religions, and the result is that the Bible is the greatest book ever to exist in the history of the world." What I'm getting at here is that this country was not founded by deists. It was not a mistake of the Enlightenment. In fact, it was something that happened right before it, which is what we call the First Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening were activist pastors known as the Black Robe Regiment standing up in churches and open-air forums across America, contesting for the welfare of the city which they are in. Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God, telling people to repent and to find a new connection with their ultimate purpose, the sovereign and the almighty God. Once people started to think about this, they started to ask the question, well, if we are free in Christ, why are we not free in this government we have with King George? You see, it was Christians and pastors that even started this line of thinking. And it's only going to be Christians and pastors that can get us back to that. How about abolishing slavery? Now, first of all, let me first say, America was not founded on slavery. And one of the things we're going to be doing here at Freedom Square, we're going to have a chance to do some questions. We're going to have a Socratic element of this, which you don't find too often in colleges, universities, and high schools anymore. We're going to get deep into the history. I believe that one of the main issues of why we're not seeing enough action is that people do not know prior courageous action that preceded them. And one of the big lies that happens in our country is that America was founded on slavery. The first draft of the United States, the Declaration of our country by Thomas Jefferson, in his original handwriting, was him rejecting and blaming King George for an unspeakable sin of slavery. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, being a slave owner himself, and by the way, none of us ever are hypocrites, right? None of us ever have sinned, and we never have done anything wrong, right? We're all perfect. We try to judge the founding fathers. There's actually a really good verse for that. Thomas Jefferson said, King George has waged a cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of liberty and life in the persons of distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in the transportation there within. Thomas Jefferson was blaming King George, saying, there's something wrong that's happening here. Thomas Jefferson, being the third American president, signed a moratorium saying the slave trade into the United States is over. In fact, how about the new part of land in America? The Northwest Territories. No, it wasn't Seattle or Idaho. It was Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan. That was considered to be the Northwest back then. That was the first new land. So when you go into new land, that should be a reflection of your values. That's when you go into a new house, you're saying, I'm going to start a new life. This is my value system, right? Not what came before, but I'm going to put what I believe into what is new. Well, the Northwest Territories, which was signed into law, one of the first acts of Congress ever, by President George Washington. They had a decision to make. We got all this territory. You could grow crops. You can travel. It's fertile land. Should it be slave or free? Well, the Northwest Territories, the first new sovereign part of land that we have documented history of on our planet, was free. It was a free land. It was not a slave land. And that changed the trajectory of our nation, where it said, hey, slavery ends at the Ohio River. That the new territories in America were going to be free territories. Now, mind you, of course the Founding Fathers wrestled with abolishing slavery in the American South. But that was actually a minority opinion. It was becoming less popular until who I consider to be the great villain of American history, someone you should all be very familiar with, John C. Calhoun, who was vice president to Andrew Jackson and to John Quincy Adams. He came up with a bad idea, an evil idea, where he misrepresented the text of the Bible, which we've never seen happen ever before, right? It warns us about this in 1 Peter, by the way, to justify slavery in a very contorted and pernicious and evil way through the Bible. It resulted in the second thing that Christians influenced our world for good, which is the abolition of slavery in our country. Abraham Lincoln, who some people said he wasn't a Christian, but he famously said he only read two things, and that's where he got his morals from. He read the Bible every night, he read the Shakespeare every month, and that's where he got his worldview from. And Abraham Lincoln famously said, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. In fact, the idea that we were able to abolish slavery in our country is a very, very consequential and big deal. But who was it that inspired William Wilberforce? What was it, I should say? It was the teachings and the writings of the scriptures. In fact, the Supreme Court of Mississippi ruled in 1818, slavery is condemned by reason and the laws of nature. It exists and can only exist through municipal regulations. And in no matter of doubt, courts must learn to rule in favor of life and liberty. And so, as we look at American history, it's always been the church and pastors that have decided to step up on big public forums and say, this is right and this is wrong. It is Christians that have decided to rise up and say, I'm not just going to be a spectator, I'm going to get into the game. And then it comes to the third example that I want to explore with you, which is something that I mentioned here before when I spoke at, which is, why didn't communism work here? Now, I don't make it a habit to read a lot in my speeches, you guys know that, but I wanted to make sure I was very precise in why we are doing this project together and what we're gonna try to do here in the state of Arizona. I'm gonna read this, which is a sermon given by a pastor. If a pastor gave this sermon today, in most churches, he would be run out. And I want you to guess who it is and no saying it out loud. This was given in the 1950s. The communist revolution that was born in the hearts of Marx and Engels in the middle of the 19th century is not going to give up or retreat. No amount of words at the United Nations or peace conferences in the Far East is going to change the minds of communism. It is here to stay. It is a battle to the death. Either communism must die or Christianity must die. Has it ever occurred to you that the devil is a religious leader and millions are worshiping at a shrine today? The name of this present day religion is communism. The devil is their god and Marx is their prophet. Lenin is their saint and Malenkov their high priest, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, denying their faith in all ideologies, except their religion of revolution. These diabolically inspired men seek in devious and various ways to convert a peaceful world to the doctrine of death and destruction. So fanatical and ruthless are these disciples of Lucifer that in 30 years they have slaughtered millions of innocent people and stood prepared with poised weapons to kill millions in an all-out effort to spread their doctrines to the ends of the earth. What is so subtle about the creed of communism? What sort of ideology has captured the loyalty of countless millions of around the world? Politically, a communist is one who believes the state is supreme and the individual exists only for the welfare of governments. Economically, a communist believes in the replacement of private property in the land and capital by common ownership. Socially, a communist does not believe in marriage as an institution of God, but only as a merely biological arrangement to have children and heirs to the communist state. Ethically, the communist is a believer, a devotee to the big lie. Theologically, the communist is an atheist, a despoiler of churches and a murderer of Christians. A war of ideologies is being waged throughout the world and here in America. A war of the secular against the spiritual. The actual battle in the areas of combat are only material manifestations of the larger battle that rages in the hearts of men throughout the earth. Will it be truth or a lie that wins? Will we be motivated by materialistic philosophy or spiritual power? Will we be led by the Jehovah God or duped by Satan? The battle lines are clearly drawn. Billy Graham, 1954. If Billy Graham can speak out on the moral issues and call it what it is, every pastor in the country can speak out on the moral issues of what's going on in America today. So I want to share a couple of the verses and then I want to start to get more and more specific. Because this is going to be a forum and we're going to have a chance for you to talk about what's happening in the community around you. Everything we want you to be thinking about is the why and then the how. Why should I do this? And then how do I get it done? Because we as Christians, we do not sit idly by when a great injustice is occurring. We should never be indifferent to the suffering of others, ever. We as Christians will never allow lies to govern our society. Remember, Jesus did not just speak truth. He was truth. He was the embodiment of truth. And we as Christians must speak right and wrong. We as Christians must be leaders, not complainers. It's not enough just to watch Fox News, Tucker Carlson, and buy the pillow and hope that's going to save Western civilization. Promo code Kirk, by the way, for all of you watching at home. It's time to get into the arena. How about some scriptures here? You are the light of the world. The town built on a hill cannot be hidden. We have the truth, everybody. It's time for us to proclaim it in the area and the city of which we are in. And my favorite new verse, right, Steve? My new favorite verse. And now we're going to get more and more specific. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Ephesians 5:11. That's kind of my daily job, by the way. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Okay, let's start exposing them. I'm telling you right now, Arizona's changing. It's not changing for the better. And we're all groaning because the Bible says we will groan. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. We have sat idly by for too long, everybody. And I also want to speak to the people that are here tonight that are not Christians. Welcome, by the way. And this has to be all of us working together. And I want to just say for a moment the vision that we have for Turning Point Faith. And Rob and I are going to be working on this, and pastors across the country. We are a secular 501c3 organization. We have people of all different sorts of faith backgrounds and beliefs. You guys know what I believe and why I believe it. But if we are serious about taking back this constitutional republic, which is a pluralistic society, we must employ the Galatians 3 model, which is that the law holds you in place until faith comes. And so we are not going to bring the church into Turning Point. We're going to try to bring the successful model of what we've done at Turning Point USA into churches and places of worship and religious institutions across the country. And here's why. When I see our Turning Point USA staff members who are incredible, or our Turning Point USA chapter leaders that are under attack every single day on these campuses, I say, man, if this 16-year-old can stand for truth at their high school campus, pastors can also stand for truth in their churches. How many of you are familiar in any way, shape, or form with the term critical race theory? Anyone? Good amount of hands, but still a fair amount of hands that did not raise. If I would have said that a year ago, probably 5 hands would have went up. So it's starting to get more out there. This is no joke. This is civilization-ending stuff, and you guys know I don't do hyperbole. This is the type of ideology that can destroy the ties that bind us together. It is anti-biblical. So what does the Bible have to say about race? Let's start about what we believe. God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him does what is right and acceptable to him. Acts 10:34. Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians 3:28. Acts 17:26. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. We look at the spirit and the soul, the character and the actions of people, not the skin color or the melanin content. But what if I told you that the opposite is being taught in schools across the country, and yes, in schools here in Arizona? So let me tell you what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is growing at a rapid pace across our country. It is harder to find schools that aren't doing it than schools that are. And they're camouflaging and disguising it, but they're starting to say the private part out loud. Here's what it is. It started in the 1960s, and if any of you are interested, you should read a book by James Lindsay called Cynical Theories. It's a terrific book on this topic. It's a belief that is an extension of the Marxist view of the world, and we already heard Billy Graham's views on Marxism, that everything in life is a view of the oppressed and the oppressor. That everything in life is the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. It's the people in charge and the people that aren't in charge. But critical race theory takes it even further. Critical race theory believes that white people by definition are the oppressors, and that black people or people of color are the oppressed. There is no escaping this paradigm, and the only way to make right for any wrong that they pinpoint is now to discriminate against the discriminators. Is now more discrimination against any sort of group is now the solution. So this is championed by someone by the name of Ibram X. Kendi. Anyone know that name? Well, you should get to know that name, because they're having more influence on the education of your children than any other person. He's kind of the scholar, if you will, behind critical race theory. He has this philosophy called anti-racism. Has anyone heard that term recently? He believes that the world should be separated into racists and anti-racists. Here are some of his ideas. He believes that standardized tests are, quote, the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade black minds and legally exclude their bodies. Capitalism, he says, that is a conjoined twin of racism. He believes that a race-neutral country or a racially blind country is, quote, the most threatening racist movement in the country. And his solution, in his own words, are, quote, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Now, if you think you're reading something from Nathan Bedford Forrest from the KKK of the Deep South, it's awfully similar. You see, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, 53% English as a second language high school, with people of different races and backgrounds. I was always taught to de-emphasize race, and it worked. We cared about character and values, not on skin color, not on these ridiculously arbitrary tribal lines that are being drawn. And where we are headed right now is a collision course that will tear our constitutional republic apart. So a lot of people say we gotta get involved, we gotta do something. Well, let's read Litchfield Elementary School District's press release. Anyone know where Litchfield Elementary School is? It's in Litchfield Park, Arizona, 272 East Sagebrush. They don't like it when you read this stuff, by the way. Now, let's make sure what we're doing is biblical, right? Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Got it, okay, what we're doing is biblical. They wrote this Litchfield Elementary School number 17. This is elementary school. They have an equity statement. Some of it is rather non-specific, so you gotta dig, right? Because they don't think people actually read to the end of these things. And then you actually read, you're, oh wow, thank you for admitting. We subscribe to the author Ibram X. Kendi's definition of racism. There is no in-between of safe space and not racist. So then I decided to have our team, hey, can you actually go find their work toolkit? Like, what are our kids, what are our 7-year-olds in Arizona actually learning? Now, I'm doing this intentionally because I think those of us that are in the public space, we get too broad too much. They're teaching this, they're all this is bad, and then we move on. It's time we start getting very specific. Let me show you what it says. They have discipline goals, which means to reduce disproportional discipline for black students, to reduce disproportionality in achievement for black and Hispanic students, and then to train all students and teachers in Ibram X. Kendi anti-racist teaching. I already told you what he believes, which is segregation is the solution. It goes through multiple pages. You guys can check it yourself, from the superintendent to the administration council. Now, thankfully, some parents are starting to rise up against this. In fact, on May 11th at 5 p.m. at the Litchfield Elementary School District, if anyone lives in the general area, I think it would be a good idea if you guys employ Ephesians 5:11 and say, segregation will have no place in Arizona as long as I have breath in my lungs. And it keeps on going, and we're gonna post this all on our website. The Diverse Curriculum Committee, to have fine arts, audiovisual, language, and math and science and writing and technology around this curriculum. And it continues on. You guys can read the equity statement yourself, but now the people that will be held responsible for this are the teachers, the administrators, and the superintendent. This is the school board passing this. They're no longer doing this in the shadows. This is no longer a secret thing. It's all public. It's all out there. And so it's not just in Litchfield, by the way. The Arizona Department of Education has now issued a new equity toolkit for all educators to be able to lend from in the state of Arizona. Now let's talk about this idea of equity. What a linguistic act of treachery that word is, isn't it? Because who could be against equity? Let's be very clear what equality is and then what equity is. Equality can be divided in two different categories. Equality of rights, equality of opportunity. But equity is something very different. So equality of rights, meaning that the law should be blind. That's why in the ideal we have the picture of Lady Liberty with a blind over her eyes. That no matter who you go in front of a judge, you will be treated under the same constitutional rights. That comes from the biblical idea, by the way, of non-preferential treatment in front of the law. Most countries are stunned and they're confused by how America was able to make this work. It's because the Bible inspired the writers and the framers of the US Constitution. That's why. A secular humanist type approach would not be able to get to this. Then there's equality of opportunity. This is why we should champion school choice. This is why we should talk about rebuilding the American family, which is the ultimate way to be able to curb poverty and instill morals in young children. Equality of opportunity. But then there's this really tricky word, equity. Boy, is equity a dangerous word. Equity means that we will redistribute the outcome based solely on things you can't change. I'm going to say that again. We are going to redistribute the outcome based on things you can't change, like skin color. Or let's just have Ibram X. Kendi describe it for us, who happens to be a scholar on this sort of stuff, where he says, discrimination now, no, that's right, the only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. The defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. He tells you right now, discrimination is the way to do this. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is good and therefore anti-racist. If the discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. And so he wants to create a new Department of Anti-Racism in the federal government that would be comprised of formerly trained experts on racism and no political appointees. And it goes on from there. So at the Arizona Department of Education, they now have a new equity toolkit, where if you are even in nursery school, they are now teaching 3-month-old babies and anyone involved that they are racist. The Arizona Department of Education has created an equity toolkit designed to teach critical race theory to children, offering a number of recommended readings on the topic. So let me tell you deeper into critical race theory what they believe. They do not believe in individuals. They do not believe that you are made in the image of God. They don't. They believe you're part of your tribal group. That's it. They believe you're part of who you look like. They don't believe that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, that you need to come in a connection with your Creator. They believe you're nothing more than who you look like. They don't believe in math and science. They don't. They are outspoken critics of this idea of Newtonian physics. They think math and science are created simply and solely to advance and protect a white supremacist construct. They don't believe in dialogue. They don't believe in speech. Who is the greatest example of peaceful dialogue? Jesus Christ. Went around talking to people, asking questions, speaking truth as he was truth. They believe dialogue and speech is a false promise towards oppression. They also believe that racism is everywhere. It's in the sky, it's in the stars, it's in what you buy. And Ibram X. Kendi articulates this. And the only solution is massive redistributive equity. But this is now in the Arizona Department of Education. And it says one of the recommended readings is that as soon as children are able to speak, you must let children draw these conclusions based on what they see, when it comes to race, which is a doctrinaire example of critical race theory in the Arizona Department of Education. It doesn't stop there. There's another equity event for the Arizona School Board Association. Anyone heard of this organization before? It's a little sneaky organization. The Arizona School Board Organization, ASBA. This event serves as a touchstone for diversity, equity, and inclusion enshrined in school policies statewide. So this is for all school board members to gather to learn how they can implement this in school districts across the state of Arizona. This, and I quote, the ASBA says that race should be focused on more intensely. Let me be as clear as I possibly can. If you think race should be focused on more intensely, you're a racist. They have all these speakers. This actually happened on April 21st. So now, this is now going to spread into more school districts because they've just brought in all the school board members and trained them up on what they need to be doing, and then they redeployed all the school board members across the country. Now, what's the one characteristic all school board members have in common? They're all replaceable. They have that all in common. It's kind of an amazing thing, is that you can replace them. And here's the other thing, all of you can be school board members too. That anyone in this room can then run for school board and start asking questions about these things. Do you know what's the one thing these people hate? they hate attention. It's amazing. They want attention all the time, except when it comes to these sorts of things. In fact, we were just talking early in South Lake, Texas. Let me tell you a story. This sort of nonsense was just spreading like you wouldn't believe. And we were just doing this on our podcast the other day. In South Lake, Texas, they saw this very curriculum being implemented to young children. So a bunch of parents got together and rose up, and they just had their election last Saturday. And by a margin of 70% going for the good guys and 30% for the bad guys, they rejected critical race theory in the local schools in South Lake, Texas. But it took us to get the message out, right? Because what was happening, and we just talked about this earlier, is, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. You see, they take advantage of your love of things that matter. Let me say that again. They take advantage of your love of things that matter. This shouldn't be the most important thing in your life. Your kids should matter more. Your church should matter more. Your business should matter more. They know you're distracted building. They know you're distracted creating, fruitfully multiplying, so they're sneaky. They know that you're not going to show up to the school board meeting. That's why they're sometimes even violating the Open Meetings Act, which is what happened in South Lake, Texas. That's why they don't like it when they get public comment. That's why they don't like it when they get emails from everyone. By the way, all of the emails for the Litchfield district are publicly available. You guys can look it up. You can do whatever you want. They don't like that. And if I were to offer one critique, if I may, of the conservative movement, we've thought way too national for way too long. We have just been so focused on Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Meanwhile, all this rubbish is just being passed every single day. And nothing's ever really going to change until Jeremiah 29:7 starts to happen. Is to seek, which comes from that Hebrew word, badrash, demand, desire, the welfare, the shalom, the peace of the city which we are in. And so, a couple other examples, and I want to get to some questions, is that this school board, the equity event, happened on April 21st to 22nd. Most people didn't even know this happened. They had all these speakers, very, very radical speakers. And so now they're going to come back and they're going to try to sneak this all throughout the state of Arizona. They're going to try to sneak it through maybe in Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, maybe in Glendale, maybe in Mesa, maybe in Chandler. And that's all of a sudden where this event is the equal and opposite reaction that they never would have ever thought was going to happen. That's why we're going to keep meeting every single month, and I'm going to be updating you guys. You know, this is being taught here. You know, this person right here is doing their job and this person isn't. You see, this, I believe, is fulfilling a biblical commandment. And I'm going to tell you why. Rob and I have done study on this one word, and I've become obsessed over it. One of the most famous verses in the Bible is when Jesus comes up to the mouth of the Jordan River with his disciples at Caesarea Philippi, and he asks the question, who do you say that I am? Or who do men say that I am? And there's a dialogue that goes back and forth, and at the end of it, Christ says, on this rock, build my, we say church, but the word is ecclesia. In your free time, just go look up that one word. Just type that into a search engine, hopefully not Google, ecclesia. What are you going to find? Well, it tells you what an ecclesia is. An ecclesia was kind of a really special thing back in Jesus' time. It was not a religious gathering. It wasn't. An ecclesia was a local political gathering, emphasis on local. In Greek times, when anything went wrong, when they wanted to figure out how they were going to levy taxes or figure out how they were going to educate their children, they said, we're having an ecclesia tonight. Tonight we're going to have an ecclesia. So they'd have an ecclesia, and they would fast and pray before they entered, and then they would vote. And at every single ecclesia, they would have two other Greek words that were the words that they always tried to accomplish. Call it kind of the North Star. Isonomia and eleutheria, which means Greek words for freedom and equality. I wonder what country has those two words as central organizing principles. But then we go back to the scriptures where Jesus says, on this rock build my ecclesia. Well, it wasn't synagogue, it wasn't temple, it was something more than that. And so what if I told you that for the last 20 years, if the church would have been doing what we're doing right now, just telling you what's happening, giving you some history, giving you some perspective, the organic, spontaneous action that's about to happen after tonight is exactly what the church should be facilitating. is that this is our biblical commandment, to make you aware that you have to take responsibility and leadership for what's happening around you. And so our vision, and this is what we've shared the entire time, is that we want other pastors to start to do this and have Freedom Squares in Albuquerque and Dallas and Asheville and Raleigh and Miami and Des Moines and Omaha and Milwaukee, because I believe one of the reasons we're seeing what we're seeing is that good people are either unaware or they are uncertain on how to act with what's happening around them. They say, I know something doesn't feel right, and I got 35 pillows in my garage, but he's the only guy that tells me what to do. It's true. Promo code Kirk, right, Barry? I'm kidding. You gotta give it. He does do the direct ask. So I'm gonna do the direct ask as bluntly as I can with the biblical commandment. It's time to no longer be spectator Christianity. It's time to be participant, everybody. And so I want everyone here to fast and pray over this the next couple days. And the next Freedom Square we're gonna have is June 8th, which is, man, I'm not happy with what's happening at Litchfield. I'm sure a lot of you are. And they say all politics is local, and boy, isn't that the truth. And you think, what can I do about that? But better yet, I can organize, I have friends there, I might show up at their next meeting, but I also might be really concerned that it's coming to a school board near me. Maybe you're gonna run for mayor, which is one of the most important, least respected positions in the country, which is mayor races. Maybe it's city council. Maybe you're like, I can't run for anything, but I'm gonna go support and pray for and help someone that is. I'm gonna someone that's running for city council, maybe I'm gonna just take care of their kids that night. Maybe my tithe and my offering for the community, I might not have the money to be able to give as much as I want to the church, but I'm just gonna look after someone running for office who's a Christian, spirit-filled person. I'm gonna look after their kids one night a week so they can go knock on doors and campaign. That's where the church all of a sudden starts to fill in the gaps of the reasons people say they don't wanna run. Top reasons people say they don't wanna run. I don't know how. Believe it or not, that's the number one reason. But look, you've seen who we have in elected office. It's not that hard, okay? Let me just say that is not a great. Number two, understandable. I'm afraid. They're gonna attack me, they're gonna smear me, they're gonna malign me. You're right. It says in the scriptures very clearly, that is a guarantee of our faith. You should be praising the Lord when you get persecuted, because you're right where God wants you at that moment. And the third reason is I don't think anyone's gonna support me. I don't know if anyone's gonna get behind me. Well, look around you. Here we are in the valley with well over 1,200, 1,300 people that all are sharing that same common concern, that same belief. There's more of you than you could ever imagine. And one of the greatest tactics the enemy has ever pulled is making you feel as if you're alone. All the time. Man, I don't know if anyone else shares my values. I don't know if we have hope. I don't know if this can ever change. And I'm gonna close with this, and then we're gonna go to some questions, because we're gonna have some dialogue. I'm gonna tell you a tale of two different states. I wanna tell you the tale of California and the tale of Florida. Two states that have similar populations and two completely different outcomes. California was gonna be the state of the future. California was one of the most conservative states in the country. California was the place where you didn't matter where you were from, it didn't matter who your parents were, you could go there and you could succeed. California now is the laughing stock of the country. The governor's getting recalled, of which I wish him no luck. The state is broken. They have lost population for the first time ever. I know many people part of the Calvary movement in California, of which Rob is part of, and many others. Jack Hibbs and James Cadiz and Joe Pettick and so many others. There was an agreement amongst the major churches in California. They said, we don't do politics. We don't do this. Well, ever since that moment, California has aborted more children than the entire combined population of Canada. Authors of no-fault divorce, transgender bathrooms, and people fleeing because they know that it does not represent their values. Now, can California be won over? I don't know. I'm hopeful. But the battle for California actually really isn't today. This is the battle to reclaim it. The battle happened when that inflection moment happened. It happened about 15, 20 years ago when it was legitimately a 50-50 state. So let's talk about Florida. Florida has more registered Democrats than Republicans. Let me say that again. Florida has more registered Democrats than Republicans. But something happened in Florida a couple years ago where all of a sudden, for whatever reason, call it Midwesterners like me that were fleeing Illinois, and someone that has a lot of courage and a lot of boldness, Florida is all of a sudden now the true state of the future. Florida has a 0% income tax rate. Florida said that you're not allowed to teach critical race theory in any schools across the state of Florida. Florida signed an anti-rioting bill, which says if you're traveling across state lines to Florida, you will face a minimum 10 years in prison. Florida has open carry. Florida has the most robust school choice programs in the country. Florida has a booming economy. They reopened their state against every other defiance, and they opened up a lot quicker than Arizona, let me tell you. In May of last year, with the second oldest population of the country, even older than Arizona, with a lower virus transmission rate and hospitalization rate and death rate than the 10 lockdown states on average combined. So you have two states. And Arizona is in the TBD category. So a lot of people like me that are saying, you know what, I'm gonna go all in for Arizona. I'm gonna give it everything I got. And let me be very clear. I do not mean this politically. I don't. I mean this culturally, because all the politics stuff goes downstream from there. But in Florida, I could tell you, because people rose up courageously, people of faith, people of morals. Florida is a state where all of a sudden where you play a little bit of offense, it's like, whoa. All of a sudden, there's more of us than we could ever imagine. Where California was a state where it was like, you know what, we want to be cool and we want to be comfortable Christianity. And now you saw the result of that. Arizona is literally 50-50. 50% that want to see it go in the direction of California, and 50% that want to see it go in the direction of Florida. You guys might not realize this or not. Everywhere I go, people ask me about Arizona. Everywhere I go. They ask about the audit. They ask about what happened. They ask about whether the state is going to be what they once remember it. You guys might have thought 5 years ago you lived in a kind of a boring political state with no big fights. You happen to be right where God wants you to be if you care about the future of this republic. You happen to be right in the middle of what matters most. And so we want to grow this, and I'm telling you right now, I'm going to give it everything I can, because this can be done, everybody. Bold, dramatic type action, where all of a sudden we're sunsetting the income tax, where we're saying no critical race theory in our schools, where we are building up churches and people of faith. That's the sort of state that I know the values of Arizona deep down hold. The only thing that's missing is action. And so as we do this month after month, you guys can circle it on your calendar. Next one will be June 8th, which is that Tuesday, and I want you to bring more friends. I want to fill this thing up eventually, and we're going to pack this up with new and exciting speakers. You know, we're going to have different teachings, and we're always going to have the teaching be adjusted to whatever's happening in the news cycle. What does the Bible say about immigration? What does the Bible say about race? And then we're going to get very specific. We're going to go through the marching orders of just not the big stuff, but then the stuff that you can actually do. And look, I'm telling you, everybody, if we act, we are going to make Arizona look like Florida and say, do not California my Arizona. Let's do some questions, everybody, and God bless you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right, let's get to some questions. I want to get to as many as possible. You guys can form two lines in the two aisles. Just make them super quick. And we want to hear from students or from young families in particular as you guys wrestle with this stuff. Okay. Hey, man, good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you. Thank you for everything. I just wanted to ask, I'm sure you heard about Joe Rogan recently had to backtrack on some comments about young people getting the vaccine, specifically 21 and under. And with him backtracking, since he's on a bigger platform, do you believe that in the coming months and towards the end of the year, they will start limiting freedoms who have already made for people who have already made up their mind that they are not going to get the vaccine?
Look, so I get asked about the vaccine all the time. So let me tell you, I'm by no means an expert in this, but I'm going to tell you personally what I've decided to do. I'm going to tell you why I decided what I did, and then you guys can make your own decision. I'm not in a place to judge you or to categorize you based on